Hey, everybody, we're talking about grief and particularly childhood grief, children going through very, very difficult things today. And as it so happens, our highlighted charity for this month touches on that as well as grief and trauma for many, many people. Our highlighted charity this month is CHIRLA, which is the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. There are many areas right now where we're finding immigrant rights being treated very, very non-humanely. And many people are having their families separated, traumatized, or separated and traumatized. There's just a lot going on. CHIRLA is a great organization that endeavors to help to fight for the humane treatment. They deserve your attention and donations and support. And go to CHIRLA, CHIRLA, that's chirla.org, to learn more about this wonderful organization. And if you are a contributor to The Broken Brain, then 50% of your donation, if you join this month, will go to CHIRLA for the duration of your membership as well. So let's check it out, chirla.org. Hit share, hit save, hit donate, do whatever you can, and look for those areas that are helping immigrants in your local area.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, your host. Today, as we're looking at a little bit more into the intersection of psychology and culture. That's right, the intersection is what I said, but really, today we're going to focus more on the intersection between those two. We are going to launch into what is going to be a really fascinating discussion. As you know, we visit different kinds of trauma and responses that is a big focus of mental health these days, is trauma treatment. And we're going to talk about an associated, adjacent, kind of connected thing, which is the dynamics of grief and loss, but with some important differences and things we can learn about that. My guest today is Dr. Korie Leigh, who is the author of the new book, When Everything Changes, Parenting Through Loss and Grief. Dr. Leigh is no stranger to the world of being an author. She's got some of their best-selling works out about child bereavement with trauma-informed support, pediatric palliative care, and other areas like that. Dr. Leigh is one of the nation's preeminent experts in childhood grief and also is an advisory member of the board for Sesame Street Workshops, especially in areas of materials for grief and loss for resources for children. Dr. Leigh, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me and for having these kind of conversations with your listeners.
I'm very excited to get into some of these dynamics, particularly as it pertains, well, and anything that pertains to children pertains to everybody, because not only were any of us who are working with or parenting or taking care of children are also affected by the things we are teaching them and the way that they'll act. So yeah, just the way that this touches on the particulars with kids and how it affects all of us. What could you tell everybody a little more about how did you come to specialize in this area? What was it that got you into this sordid business of mental health?
Yeah, so I started out as a child life specialist. And for your listeners that are like, a child life, huh? Child life specialists work mostly in pediatric hospitals, helping children to cope and understand what's happening to them when they're in the hospital. So we oftentimes will provide preparation for medical procedures, use developmentally appropriate information to help a 3-year-old understand what a cancer diagnosis is versus a 7-year-old versus a 17-year-old. You'll oftentimes see us using medical play, therapeutic play, helping siblings cope, helping parents adjust to this really quite stressful environment that the hospital is. And so at the core, child life specialists are trained in child development with the intersection of how stress, hospitalization, and illness impacts that development. So that's how I started out. I worked in pediatric hospitals and I was faced with a lot of death. I was faced with a lot of children who were at the end of life. And it wasn't my intention to focus or to specialize in this area, but I really gravitated towards it. And we'll talk about this a little later, but as an information-based processor, When a stressor happens, I need to move towards that stressor to understand it. And even though I was trained to work with these very medically fragile children in a hospital setting, I felt like I wasn't as equipped as I wanted to be. So that's the next chapter when I found out about the field of thanatology, which is the study of death, dying, grief, and loss. And I obtained a master's degree in thanatology. And that opened the second chapter of my life where I was integrating these two aspects.
That's a really kind of a near and dear thing to me. I'm really fascinated by the area of thanatology. A couple of years back, we actually had a music thanatologist who came on the program. Mm-hmm. He gave us some examples of harp music that he would play, and he worked in either hospice or end of life, literal just very end of life. He usually would show up at the deathbed side oftentimes, and but just thanatology in general is very fascinating to me to have that specialized study in the process of death. You mentioned not really thinking about it before. I imagine this is, you probably rub shoulders with more people who have that particular specialty, but I would think this is one of those specialties that people get into the field. They're not necessarily thinking like, because it seems very intimidating, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And another hat that I wear is I am an academic. So I'm the program chair of a graduate degree in thanatology. And a lot of my students come to the field after having firsthand experience. They had a parent on hospice. They had a child die. They themselves intersected with grief in such a profound way that it fundamentally changed everything about them. And so they come to a program like mine to, establish the foundational skill set to be able to work in whatever capacity they're wanting to in this space.
Yeah. And whenever you're working with childhood, that is such a big umbrella technically, right? We could look at it as anything under 18 if we want to use that cutoff or whatever, but that's a whole range of development. As you were just talking about a child understanding, it's obviously got to be very, very different when you're working with a person who, first of all, might not grasp the understanding of cancer. What is that? Or even the understanding of, what is death as opposed to life, versus someone who's, got some definite probably experiences, opinions, and exposure to that as you get older childhood. And I mentioned there's got to be a lot of kind of like complicated parts to assessing and making a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And a really big part of why I wrote my most recent book is over the course of my 22 years of clinical work, I would see the same patterns repeat. The parents would have the same questions. How do I explain death? How do I talk about this? What do I say when my kid asks this question completely out of left field 6 months after the death occurred? How do I cope as a parent who's also grieving? Mm-hmm. And so with my background in child development at a very foundational level, I understand cognitively, social, emotionally, and relationally how children understand the world around them, how they interact with the world around them. And essentially, I take abstract, complicated topics and I distill them into simple, concrete, easy to understand language. In my book, I talk about a method called the dosing method, which is essentially you give a little bit of information, just enough to answer the question, and then you wait and you see. Does it answer satiate the need? Do they keep asking more questions? Do they say, oh, okay, like the 3-year-old I worked with, oh, okay, that's what dead means. Can we get ice cream? Mm-hmm. Right? Some parents oftentimes will think these conversations are going to be super complicated and really long. And sometimes they're 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. And then a day or 2 or 3 later, you come back and you add a few sentences and you clarify and you revisit it. And so that was really one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to really put these experiences that I've had into palatable information that parents could read really quickly and digest and be able to get it and then use it immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm noticing as I've had a lot of people on the program with a lot of a trend in modern help designed, books that are designed to help with the things, especially of mental and emotional health, and just any of the things that, sometimes I always think the term self-help is a little tricky. You never know what falls under that or whatever. But for lack of a better term, there's a modern trend in those books to add elements of what we'd usually see is here's a workbook, here's the theoretical book. And I'm just seeing that being put together so much nowadays to where it's like, no, if we're going to give the theory, let's go ahead and work on it now too, which I think is very valuable, is much more valuable actually than just philosophical musings. And then, I mean, you can only sell one if you combine them, but still, but I like the trend because I think it meets people's needs more, to be able to give them stuff that's actionable.
Yeah. And at the core, that's what I do. I meet people where they're at and we work from that place. And oftentimes parents want to have these conversations. They just need a little bit of support. They need a little bit of languaging. They need a little bit of information on why is it that we avoid euphemisms? How come we might phrase a question with an open-ended statement as opposed to a closed-ended statement? And then give them the resources so that they can do what they do best. They know their children the best, right? They're the experts in their children. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert in your child. I just happen to have some information that might be helpful for you. And so I think books like the one that I created, which have scripts, actual he said, she said, actual questions that kids ask, a say this, don't say that, for each of these pretty typical loss experiences that families will encounter: death, hospitalization, diagnosis of a chronic illness, divorce, incarceration, and climate disasters.
I'm curious what some of those things that you see, maybe we'll start with some of the don'ts that we run into or some of the common mistakes that can be made. You mentioned euphemisms as an example there, but yeah, what can you tell us about some of those pitfalls and why they're not ideal?
Yeah, and this, I want to couch this with parents want to protect their children, and they oftentimes will say things and do things and try and be present in ways that they think they know, right? And then knowing has a parenting book, like nobody leaves the hospital with okay, here's what to do when all of these things happen. And essentially everyone is trying the best that they can with the resources they have at the time. The challenge with using euphemism, and euphemism are things like they've passed away, they've gone to heaven, they're not here anymore, we've lost them. They take a complicated abstract topic and they muddy it. They make it more confusing. And so for children that are in this pre-operational, concrete understanding of the world around them, which is essentially like this magical thinking phase, right, from 3 to 6, generally speaking, when we say things like we lost them, like the 4-year-old that I worked with, who then followed that up with, well, let's go find them. Right? Or when we say they've gone to heaven and the 6-year-old says, well, can we take a trip to heaven too? Mm-hmm. As opposed to when someone dies, it means that their body has stopped working forever. Their heart doesn't beat. They don't breathe. They don't laugh and they don't play. Dead means forever. That's maybe 4 sentences. And it's incredibly concrete. For adults, it might feel stark and it might feel like, ooh, like that's a little too bristly. But for a child, they really need that concrete, descriptive information. But with the dosing method, right? Just say those 4 sentences, stop, and see how they're processing it, how they're taking it in. I think that another kind of misconception is that kids are just inherently resilient. They'll just get through it. I've heard time and time again how kids are like sponges. They'll just, soak it up and move on and they won't remember it. What we understand through developmental research is that resilience is a muscle. We all have it, but it has to be fostered and nurtured and taught. And so when experiences like loss occur, it's a teachable moment to teach that child how to label emotions, how to feel them, how to let them move through their bodies and not get stuck, and how to build coping skills. Because essentially, as much as we want to protect our children from the hurts of the world, they're going to happen. Right? And how much better prepared will they be? How much more resilient will they be if they have been taught and modeled how to hold hard things, how to have hard conversations?
Yeah, I'm curious. I'd always heard the terms from research, and this may be from a while ago, so I'm gonna run it by you, of the resiliency studies that indicate that the more interested adults, that was always the term that I'd always read, is like just even one interested adult helps resiliency to go up quite a bit. And I always feel like the term interested is a useful term, because interested is more than just supportive or more than just caring. Interested is, how are you feeling? And then I'll shut up and listen for the answer. That's interested. No, so anyway, that's some resiliency elements that I've always seen to be important or known to be. But I'm curious if the research, what are some of those elements that you mentioned with that education and that modeling and stuff that makes a difference to the level of resiliency that the kids have, from what you're saying?
Yeah, that continues to hold true. And really what we talk about is having a consistent, stable presence who is attuned. That kind of showing up and being interested is about attunement and about presence. And it is also about nervous system regulation. That's a part of attunement, right? When you have a child in front of you who is melting down and completely dysregulated, we don't meet their storm with the storm. We meet their storm with a calm. So we have to be present and attuned to our bodies and our emotions. And even if we have someone falling apart, having a meltdown, having a tantrum, we have to the best of our abilities, remain calm and present, ask those open-ended questions, validate. You're having big feelings. This is really sad that Daddy died. I don't like it either. And stay with them, right? And so the research has been consistent that there's one consistent, present adult in a child's life can absolutely help to build that muscle of resilience.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles to avoiding those pitfalls? I mean, you mentioned wanting to protect our kids, and that can go away. That doesn't actually protect them, it sounds like. And you mentioned just that feeling of like, ooh, is this too blunt? Is this too harsh? Is this too, and some of those, I imagine, fear, love, all of those. What do you see as the how people find obstacles to getting over?
Well, and I think for a lot of the families I work with, or at least the families that come to me, they would like the information so that they can phrase it in a way that's helpful. They just need access to those resources. So I think the first is having access to resources. And there are dozens and dozens of nonprofits in every state in the country that provide specific grief support. So just about every state in the country has at least one children's grief center. There are also national models, such as the Dougie Center, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and they have tons and tons of free resources. They have handouts, they have booklets, they have podcasts and YouTube. So like whatever way you consume information, they have it for you. So I think the first is just helping families recognize like there are people out there that can help and that have the resources. You don't have to recreate the wheel. That's the first. The second is really hard. And I write about this in my book. And the first part of my book focuses a lot on this. And it's recognizing how this loss experience is showing up in you first. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Where does it live in your body? What is this bringing up for you? Because current losses oftentimes propel us to past losses, right? And you can even take celebrity deaths, right? We have a lot of social expression of grief and mourning for celebrities. And oftentimes when you sit down with a person and you start to peel back the layers, it's socially acceptable to cry and to express and to gather for vigils for someone famous. But maybe it isn't for a disenfranchised kind of loss, a loss that society doesn't deem acceptable. Maybe the relationship you had to that person wasn't socially acceptable. Maybe it was stigmatized. Maybe the type of loss you had isn't acknowledged. Pregnancy loss definitely falls within that, with miscarriage and termination for medical reasons. And so we're not always given permission to feel our feelings, and we're not very good, culturally speaking, at creating places and practices for community grief.
And in a situation, especially caretaker, usually we're talking parents, obviously, parenting kind of relationship with a kid, you are their primary community.
Oftentimes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, kind of looking from a systems approach, right? You have the child, and then you have their immediate family, but then you have the community that child is a part of. Do they have caregivers? Do they go to school? Are there after school programs? Is there a faith community? Right? And then you have the state, which provides resources, right? With the laws that are passed and the bills and resources and funding, right? And then you have the country, that state, of which that community, of which that school, of which that family, right? And so when we look at all the ripple effects, we see just how many opportunities there are to be that stable, consistent person for a child.
What kinds of things, when people are watching to try to take stock, as you mentioned, kind of going at the pace and kind of trying to feel out where their child is at, and especially, you mentioned this as kind of an ongoing conversation and no judgment to the child of like, here's this few sentences. The child's like, okay. And then maybe gets bummed, maybe doesn't, maybe blows it off, maybe asks a question. Whatever they do, you try to go with, right? What are some ways, though, kind of on that deeper level of what should we be watching for especially if a child doesn't come right out and say, hey, I was pontificating about this the other day. And you know what I'm saying? How do we follow up in ways that are not overly directive, but also really taking measure of what our child really needs?
Yeah, well, and we can be directive, and being directive is oftentimes the most honest and direct, approach that we can take with children. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be a big intervention. We can use teachable everyday moments, starting with you as the parent. Are you feeling sad today? Did a song come on that reminds you of the person who died? Was your child present? You can say aloud, oh, Daddy used to love this song. I'm feeling really sad right now. Right? We can just speak aloud what's happening. And oftentimes, children will show us in their play and in their behaviors that they are ready to talk, that they want to talk, and they're not. Grief looks really different in kids. In adults, you tend to associate grief with sorrow and sadness and crying. Children, especially young children, are not going to exhibit grief that way. Oftentimes, tears don't come for months or years later. For young children especially. And particularly for young kids, and when I say young, I'm talking like 3 to 7, there is a term that we use in grief counseling called puddle jumping. And kids are like puddle jumpers. They will jump and fully immerse themselves in grief. They will feel it. They will ask questions. They will, when you're driving to school in the back of the car, be like, why did Daddy die 7 months after it happened? Because they're in the puddle right here and now. And then they're going to jump out of it. And that is developmentally appropriate. We have really big cups, so we can hold lots of information. They have little cups, so it gets full more quickly. And they have to pour it out by playing and by engaging in appropriate things.
So a big part then is not trying to project an adult perspective or our assumptions of what they are doing and feeling and processing. Then there's a lot of trying to, because just watch, observe, and listen. That's do you have ideas of that, of how do people keep from projecting what we're, you asked this question in the car on the way to school, you must be wanting to know this, and this, and we'll pull over and talk forever, or whatever, something that may not be the best call with a child of that age. How do we stay in that mindset to not do that? Because it seems there's so much assumption that we make over what is and isn't emotionally healthy. And often it just comes from what makes sense to us, but cultural as well, expectations. So yeah, how do we avoid that?
Well, I think one of the approaches, and I write about this, is the dosing method, is recognizing that part of our job as an adult in a child's life is to answer their questions honestly and appropriately, right? We don't want to sidestep. We don't want to lie. And we don't want to cloud things in euphemistic language that then leads them to try and put the pieces together and create a story that oftentimes is 10 times more scary and completely off base than if you were to sit down and say, well, dead means your body stops working and forever, and everything living dies. You'll die, I'll die, the dog will die. People usually live really long lives, right? So like having these direct, simple conversations and using that dosing method is a really, really good strategy. The other thing to, kind of look out for or be mindful of is kids are going to tell us that they're struggling with their behaviors far before they verbalize it. So it is normal and typical to see a regression when something stressful happens. It can be a death. It can be a climate disaster. It can be starting a new grade. Stressful circumstances, you will see a period of time when your child's going to regress. Maybe they were sleeping in their big kid bed throughout the night, and now all of a sudden they're waking up and they want to sleep in your bed. Maybe they have developed some new fears, right? So this is all like typical response to something stressful. And our job is to validate what they're worried about. I understand you're really scared right now, or you're worried that something's going to happen to me. Follow it up with, and here's all the things I'm doing to keep safe and keep you safe. And then the last part of that is find a place to put those feelings. This is where someone like myself can come into play, or a children's grief center, where we teach strategies and tools and interventions for, okay, we've labeled that we feel worry. We've labeled why we feel it. We've talked through it. What do we do with it? And so that's a lot of the play-based approaches and the creative, expressive approaches I use with kids and families.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest things in those types of communications is, and I'm sure there's a balance here of providing comfort, but also not telling them what to feel, sort of, because I think there's a tendency, particularly as a caregiver, to deliver bad news with sort of but here's what's going to be great, or some kind of a resolution that we hope works, that we hope will help to somehow reframe this in a way that is fill in the blank, whatever we think, positive, healthy, healing. And what I've noticed is that, with any age group, even if we don't age this, prescribed reframes, or someone telling us something that is like, here's how you should feel better because fill in the blank, and everything happens for a reason, or you're in a better place, or they're whatever, even if it's comforting to us, prescribing it to someone else is generally not very helpful. And when we receive that, I think it's very clear that we recognize that it's not helpful. But with our kids, it's hard not to try to do that, right?
It is definitely something that happens in society, right? Platitudes and silver linings. There's a really big push to make meaning out of your trauma. And the fact is that we don't find meaning. It isn't like a magical treasure that one day is going to show up. We have to make it. And the way that we make it is through a pretty complicated process of deconstructing our identity and rebuilding ourselves after a loss happens. That's a lifetime of work. So particularly with the parents I work with, there isn't a single platitude, or at least that is helpful. And so, one thing to try and remember when we have these conversations is to leave pauses, leave space. In the first book that I wrote, which is for younger children, the first few pages have one sentence, and that one sentence is someone I love died. And then there's a question at the bottom. Did someone you love die? What was their name? And then the next page, it explains what grief is. And the following page, it says something to the extent of, if your grief were a color, what color would it be? Is your grief big or small today? Right? So helping to provide some follow-up questions so that we aren't labeling or naming emotions. Now, sometimes with younger kids, they need help, right? Because their vocabulary is smaller. They need some modeling. So you might offer some suggestions. Are you feeling sad, mad, or glad? Right? And then we can kind of whittle it down from there. One thing I encourage every family to have is an emotions chart. Stick it right on the fridge and use it every day. Not just for the big feelings, not just for the sad and mad feelings. Use it for the excited feelings and the silly feelings and the butterflies in the tummy feelings, and start to integrate that language into your family's vocabulary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because they say that when we're communicating with kids about something hard, the best work to put into it, a best technique to put into it, is something that hopefully has already happened, which is that we're proactively talking about everything. Or that we're talking, that we're communicating, and the way, do we snap when we're told something? Do we listen? Do we use emotional terminology? Those kinds of things, all the way from, things like this, like tragedy, or that's one of the feedback that I've always heard about when you're going to tell kids about the facts of life or whatever, those kinds of talks about sexual development, that the same thing as if you've never talked about anything very serious, it's going to go a lot worse than if it's like everything serious, everything casual, everything whatever, we are communicating openly. Then our child is usually more ready, right, to hear any topic that we're going to have to talk about. Yeah.
And ready also from the perspective that hopefully by the time we have these conversations, also practice coping skills. We've practiced, okay, we can identify and name our feelings. What do we do when we feel those feelings?
Now, how much of this do we keep in mind, let's say, during a loss that is actively happening, not just following a loss, when someone is going through the terminal stages, or there's a tragedy that is in development but is not, I'm going to say resolved. That's not but at least the end of the life hasn't ended yet, and the chapter of dealing with it hasn't happened yet. Same types of things, I assume, but what are some of the differences in that stage of a situation?
Yeah, and there are a lot of similarities. And I also write about this in my book. I have a chapter on approaching an end of life. So hospice, hospitalizations, impending kind of anticipatory grief. Lots of the same things that we've talked about. So dosing, give a little bit of information, see what happens. We want to provide honest, developmentally appropriate, concrete information. But a second or a third step beyond that is some preparation. So what are they going to see, hear, smell, taste if they're entering a hospital room? If they're going to see a loved one that physically looks completely different than what they remember them to be? If there are machines in that room, what are they doing? What are the sounds they're going to hear? Right? So we want, to the best of our ability, prepare kids before what they're about to experience.
Do you have any things that you've seen, or any ideas about when people should start informing? Let's say, they're going through a process of maybe one of the parents is, or a grandparent or someone in the life of the child is we're getting diagnosed, or maybe we've already been diagnosed, but we don't know what the likelihoods are yet, or we're taking to see what stage, or we're in the early forms of treatment, and maybe it's a 60-40, 70-30, 20-80, whatever. And we just don't know yet. And then I was curious, do you see any kind of sure this is dependent on the situation, but are there any kind of overarching kind of guides that we look at to say, when do we want to start to loop the kids in that something bad is happening potentially or is already happening, or any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And we want to provide kids with the information that's going to help them in their day to day, right? So if there's a family member who has received a chronic illness diagnosis, that illness is going to significantly impact their breakfast routine, their school routine, what happens when they come home, what they're exposed to. We have to prepare them, right? Using the dosing method, using the 5 senses, using concrete information for what they are experiencing. We also want to use language that helps them understand. You might see people crying. People are really upset and sad that grandma fill in the blank, right? We provide the information they need at the time. And then as the situation progresses, we start to add more and more information, but at little bits at a time. Oftentimes, kids will bring it up. Is grandma going to die? Are you going to die? Am I going to die? Well, so-and-so at school, when her grandma was in hospice, it meant that she died, right? So sometimes they already have information based on what they've been exposed to. That's something we also really want to understand. We want to know, what do they already know?
That's the thing, is we tend to assume that we can control outcomes by controlling access to information, but that's always tricky because it always doesn't work maybe the same as we expect it to, I could say. Or kids pick up more, than we think they do.
Yes, they do. And they hear conversations that you don't think they can hear. And what they will also do, what I've alluded to in parts of our conversation, is they'll take bits and pieces of information that might not go together and make them go together. And that can oftentimes result in really big misconceptions, such as something that they did caused the person to die. That's a really common one. I didn't do my chores last week, and so I'm being punished, and that's why grandma died. Or something completely not even related to that. And then they feel guilty because they think that they caused it to happen. And so when you pick up on misconceptions that are clearly way off base, it's helpful to address them right in the moment. Okay, I understand you think about it like this. Actually, here's what being dead means. And I do this in my day-to-day life. I have 6-year-old stepkids that I live with, and they'll oftentimes say things in passing, and I'll be like, wait, can you say that again? Well, what does dead mean? And when they get it right, I say, yeah, right on. And when there are a few misconceptions, I'll say, well, let's take a step back. Let's talk about the bones. The bones stay here on Earth. They don't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the element of how much everybody knows something when there's something really going on. And it hit me that, what do we say to each other as adults, right? It's like, oh, how'd that test go? Oh, okay, what are we waiting for? Okay, now we're talking about, we're worried about mom, we're worried about dad, which would be grandma and grandpa, maybe in this case I'm making up. And then it's like, but yet do we tell the kid like, oh, yeah, they're sick and they've been to the doctor, and, oh, why were you sad? Well, I'm sad because it's my dad. Grandpa has had some stuff and I hope he gets better. And is he going to die? I don't actually know that because I can't promise, that he won't or whatever. It's like, sort of trying to find age appropriate ways to extend what seems to me to almost be like extend the courtesy of being open to some age appropriate level. Am I picking up that correctly?
Yeah. Absolutely. And you can even take that example and take it a step further. If the child says, well, is grandpa going to die? Like, well, honey, everyone dies. And usually people die when they're really old, and grandpa's really old. Yeah. The doctors are doing everything that they can to make him comfortable, but we don't know when he's going to die. Not that we hope he isn't, right? Because he is, right? And it might be closer than we know.
That's interesting because I've also seen that other side where when we don't tell kids something really bad is happening because it isn't, but it's something is happening that we are talking about and maybe you haven't even thought to pass on. And they're like, hey, is grandpa really sick? Or kids will start to put that together and say, I think grandpa's going to die. And if we do have a discussion, we can at least say all the stuff like the education about death, but it's always nice if you can tag on like, no, he's got an ankle thing. It's not life threatening. Or whatever,
Yes.
We're worried about him. He can't walk around, but it's because his ankle or whatever got fixed, replaced, whatever. And so it's not life threatening at this, he's not about to die,
Exactly. And that's the contextual information, right? Like, it's like, well, what's the diagnosis and why is grandpa going to the doctor? Exactly. Right. So you address the misconception or the fear and you talk about it openly, but then you also help to address the reality of the situation.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes I know that it's hard for me to fall into. There's the trying to protect people in ways that, from what you're saying, the protection, if we define protection as not letting someone know about something, especially a kid, we're not actually being kind. In fact, oftentimes it struck me that we can kind of overly focus on the risk of bad news versus the risk of not communicating, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes when children are not told or not given the information, and then I work with them either immediately after or years after, it is incredibly common for those children to become quite angry at the parent for withholding information, not giving them the opportunity to say goodbye, go to the funeral, whatever that happens to be. And then we get lots of other challenges that can be created from that as this child progresses in their development and they start to form their sense of self, their core beliefs. I can trust people in the world. I can't trust people in the world. People will be honest with me. People will not be honest with me. Those type of core beliefs are formed in early childhood. And so these are opportunities, these are teachable moments that we can have with children to help them build a strong sense of self, to help them manage and deal with really hard stuff that's going to happen, and to help them build resilience so that they can be the helpers in the world, so that they can keep doing whatever it is that they're meant to do in this world and have the understanding, I can get through hard stuff.
Then that's an important reframe, is to look at it as helping, as teaching, as things. Because as you said earlier, right, the obstacle of being like, I care. It's like, well, if I can funnel that energy into the things that are actually helpful, I can maybe use the same thing that would make me afraid to be open to motivate me to get over that fear or push past that fear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, there are a lot of families who I've worked with over the years who, for lots of reasons, can't have these conversations. They are too emotionally overwhelmed themselves. They're feeling their grief so intensely that it's really, really hard for them to have these conversations. So that's when someone like myself or a children's grief center can step in and provide support. When I worked in hospital and pediatric hospice settings, I would oftentimes have those really difficult conversations about death with the children, with the parents present, so that I could model, here's how we say it, here's how we follow up the questions. And then I would sit back and defer to the parents. And it was almost like a soft handoff of, okay, I'm going to get you started, and then I'm going to take a step back.
And I'll throw this out there too. My experience has been that even working in the mental health field, even working as a therapist, when I go and look over things that are like, oh, here's some ways to relate to kids. Here's some things that I've read. I know I've had this experience. I've read things that I would have said to someone that I'm like, I should do that. And so I think that's why these kinds of resources are extremely helpful, no matter where we think we're at. It is, and as you put it, this kind of communication is really good to have proactively with our kids as well. So yes, very, very useful. Those that are listening out there, I really want them to know the best ways they can get a hold of your book and follow your work, and tell them, that some of the best places to land out there on the internet to find you. Before we share that with everybody, I wondered if you would be able to impart to us some wisdom about being part of the community. I like to ask everybody if they have any organizations or good practices that they would recommend of a way that we can give back or find effective charities. Is there anything you'd like to share with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in New Mexico and I am the director of psychosocial services for a pediatric palliative care nonprofit. We provide home-based supportive psychosocial services, respite. We do a lot of advocacy work to help expand access to pediatric palliative care. Our organization is called Heroes Path Palliative. We do respite events where we contract with music therapists and art therapists. We have a relationship with the city of Albuquerque and we get our families out into nature. We have an Action Check wheelchair, which is really cool. It goes off-roading. So we can get a lot of these kiddos that wouldn't be able to access nature really immersed into nature. And we are 100% grant funded. And so any kind of donation would go directly to support services. At a national level, there are two organizations that I want to highlight. The first is the Dougie Center, which I have talked about prior. It's based in Portland, Oregon, and they are the leader of children's grief in the nation. They oftentimes will train other people, other facilities to help create grief support programs and launch children's bereavement centers. So it's a fantastic organization to support. And lastly, the National Alliance of Children's Grief is a nationwide coalition. And so you can go there, you can click on your state, and it will give you a drop down of all of the children's grief centers and all of the vetted child bereavement and family bereavement specialists. It is also chock full of free resources.
Really useful for those out there. It's always good to have these multiple ways of giving back. I'm sort of a broken record with this idea of, even if money's tight, it doesn't cost anything to share online. And to the point of what you just said, if there are resources or those kinds of things available, as you put it, like here's the location of all the children's grief services you can find. Not a bad idea to have that if you are someone, especially if you have a connection to your neighborhood program, your Facebook for your neighborhood, your religious community, your whatever groups that you are connected with, to have once again, you can make a little list and send that out to whatever secretary of this or that or email. It's good to make lots of things we can do. And obviously, ideally, if we can chip out some resources as well, it's a hard time for everybody. So it's good to get organizations going. I really appreciate that. I'm going to check out what is the, is there a website for the one there, yours in New Mexico there?
Yeah, it's heroespathpalliativecare.org.
Okay, cool. And that's one. I'm going to check that one out too. As people know here, I'm always investigating local charities. We always focus on one each month. But tell everybody now, where do they follow your work? What's the best place to get the book and wherever you'd like us to go?
Yeah, so my website has lots of information about me, my work, who I work with, all that good stuff. And it is KorieLeighPhD.com. So there's that. I'm also moderately active on Instagram. I post pretty, infrequently, but I do update my stories almost every day. And you can get lots of kind of in the moment information from my Instagram. My book that's coming out, which publishes March 31st, is published with Free Spirit Publications. So there's a few things I want your listeners to know. The first, you can order this anywhere books are sold. I would love it if you went to your indie bookstore and asked them to get it for you, but you can 100% get it on Amazon and Bookshop and Barnes & Noble and Target and Walmart, all those places. But the other thing that I want your listeners to know is if you work for a nonprofit or a school district and you intersect with grieving kids, youth, or families, you can reach out directly to the publisher and receive a nonprofit discount. Particularly if you order more than 5 books, there's like a bulk discount. So that's something that I want everyone to know about.
Oh, good. Yes, that's really cool. I haven't heard of that really before. That's really a cool thing. I'm sure it exists other places, but and do they find that through? Is your website a good place to find those resources to go through?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Cool.
if you're interested in bulk orders, you can just reach out directly to me, and then I will personally connect you to the person at the publisher, just so you have that soft handoff and you have someone that you can contact.
And that is KorieLeighPhD.com. That's KorieLeighPhD.com. You can also just look in the show notes or the title to get the right spelling, as always, when you're looking up people's websites and such. And the book, once again, is When Everything Changes, Parenting Through Loss and Grief, that we're seeing coming out. It's coming out in the spring, right? Did we say?
March 31st.
March 31st. So just in a couple weeks from when we're recording right now. So that's
yeah.
awesome.
And if you happen to be in the Santa Fe, New Mexico area on the 31st, please stop by to the book launch. The information for that is on my social media.
Yeah.
My handle is Dr. Korie Leigh.
Okay. Dr. Korie Leigh, got that. Well, one quick reminder for all listeners, as I mentioned before, we highlight a nonprofit every month, and you heard the specific information of that up at the top of the episode. Just want to remind everyone that that's another place to go, support, and share. Also, if you'd like to support the Broken Brain, you can go to patreon.com/brokenbrain, and 50%, if you become a free subscribers get a few various things there too. If you decide to become a paid subscriber to support the program, 50% of your donation at whatever tier you're on will go to the nonprofit of focus in the month in which you joined, and that will be true for forever, or at least as long as you stay a member of that, which I hope will be forever, because you get some cool little extras too. So, Dr. Leigh, I'm so grateful for you being here. Thank you for the work that you do, and also for the information that you shared today and that you're sharing with your book.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful to be on your podcast. And I hope that this information was helpful for your listeners. And if there are questions or if someone wants to have more information, just please reach out to me. Happy to have more conversations.
No one hates history, they just haven't found the right teacher yet. Or in this case, a nerdy best friend who loves to tell you all about world history, women's history, and weird history. Hi, I'm TK, the creator of For the Love of History podcast, a place for people who want to learn more but don't know where to start, and history lovers who want to break from the mainstream. From rat trials to warrior women, we cover topics from every country and era. Whether you're a history expert or just starting out, there's a place for you here in the Time Machine. So join me every Friday on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for a brand new topic. See you there. Bye.